Welcome, Pod A students, to another thrilling edition of a screencast. This one we are going to talk about economic systems around the world. This is covering Chapter 2, Section 4 in your textbook. So we've been talking about forms of government. We've been talking about distribution of power in government systems. So just as those forms of government and the distribution of power is going to vary based on the nation, the economic system could vary from nation to nation as well. An economic system is a way of organizing the production, consumption of goods and services. So that is what we are going to look at today. So, like I was just mentioning, economic systems are going to vary from one nation to the next. So what works for one country might not work for another. And again, a lot of times economic systems are going to work in conjunction with their forms of government or the distribution of power within that government system. So it's really going to depend on who's running the country, how democratic is the nation. So we're going to look at how do we organize production of goods and services? Who controls production? Is it government? Is it the people? Who consumes the product? Who makes those choices in that economic system? Economic systems exist because all of us have needs and we have wants. The difficult part about economic systems and the, distribution of goods and services within a society is that there are unlimited wants amongst the people, but there are limited resources. So that's where that economic system is going to come into play. This is going to be a really quick overview of these economic systems and who makes the economic decisions within a nation. We'll talk more about this when you get to Pod B or economics, or if you take AP micro or macro, you'll talk more about specific economic systems. But we're going to do a quick overview today. So no matter what, because like I mentioned, a nation's resources are limited, okay? We have those unlimited wants, but we have limited resources. No matter what the country, no matter what the government system, resources are always limited. There is not enough to go around for everyone to have unlimited wants. We cannot get everything we want whenever we want it because resources, remember, could be time, they could be money, they could be land. So they are limited no matter what. So because of that, every economic system has to answer three fundamental economic questions. They have to decide what goods and services are going to be produced. So should a nation's limited resources be used to provide public goods, clean air, clean water, or to produce private goods, homes, cars, bicycles? The other question is, how should the goods and services be produced? So should corn and wheat be raised mainly on giant factory farms, or is it better for farming to be done on a smaller family farm? And the third question is, how should the people share these goods and services? Who gets what? Should it go only to the people who can afford what they want, or should goods and services go to everyone who needs them the most first? Every economic system is going to differ from one country to another because every society has to answer these questions in their own way. And that's where government comes into play. The government system and the distribution of power within that nation is going to help answer that economic question. So, in, again, every nation, in every economic system, there has to be a consideration of the four factors of production. So in order to answer those economic questions, we have to look at how the country is going to use to produce these goods and services. What factors of production are going to be used by that country to produce the goods and services? So the factors of resources required to produce most goods and services include the four things on the screen. So land, labor, capital, and entrepreneurship. We'll talk about each of them individually quickly. So land, you're familiar with this. Natural resources of a nation is what we mean by, like, an economist is going to look at natural resources of a nation. Most likely raw materials like soil, water, plants, and minerals. So that's what an economist is going to mean by land, those natural resources. And again, remember, those are going to vary vary from country to country or nation to nation. The second thing is labor. Labor is going to refer to the effort, so mental and physical effort that people put into producing a good and service. How much labor is going to, again, depend on the nation. What's the population? How many people are willing and able to work in that particular nation? And that's going to impact how goods and services are produced. Capital. When we talk about capital, there's multiple meanings and things that we need to consider. It could be the money that's needed to start a business. It could be the machinery, the buildings, the tools, the equipment that is used to produce the goods and service. Or it could mean human capital, which is the knowledge and skills that the workers are going to bring to the job. So remember, we talked about labor the last slide. Human capital could also have an impact on that labor. What's the skill? What's the education level necessary to produce goods and services? So again, this is capital is something that's going to vary from nation to nation. How much money is available? How much machinery? What types of buildings? What types of tools are going to be used? How educated is the public? All of those are things that we need to consider. Sorry, this looks like it's a little bit cut off here. So human capital, money, machinery, buildings, tools, all of those can be capital. And then the fourth thing is entrepreneurship. So this last thing is the human effort that goes into organizing the three things that we talked about, land, labor, and capital, to produce and sell goods and services. So entrepreneurs are going to be risk takers. They risk their money, they risk their time, their ideas to turn an opportunity or an idea into something that people want or need. And the way that the society uses these four factors of production is going to be determined by its economic system. So we're going to look at three basic types of economic systems that exist in the world today. We're going to look at traditional, market, and command. So we're going to start with traditional. Traditional economies are going to make decisions based on customs. So how they answer those economic questions, how they practice economic decision making is going to be based on traditions and customs of that nation. Typically, what we see in a traditional economy is people relying on time-tested customs to answer those three economic questions. What worked for their ancestors still works today for them today. So typically in traditional economies, we see people providing for themselves. We might still see hunting and gathering societies or farm agriculture-based societies. Economic activities don't have to be coordinated or regulated by the government. There's actually no government involvement at all in a traditional economy. This typically results in a lower standard of living. Families don't earn enough to do more than meet their most basic needs. So there's very limited access to goods like cars or medical care, machinery, tools. So typically this is going to result in a lower standard of living. A market economy is probably something that you are more familiar with as it's the basis for the economic system that we have in practice here. So in a market economy, economic decision making is made by the people or by individuals. So in a country with a market economy, individual producers and consumers are going to answer those three basic economic questions. So what goods and services are produced, how are they going to produce them, and how should they be distributed is all decided by the people. In a pure free market economy, the government plays little to no role in economic affairs. The producers or the people are free to decide what's going to be produced and how much you're going to charge for them. Consumers are free to decide what they want to buy, and prices are determined by the market. So this idea of supply and demand, if there is in a market, which is a place or situation where people can buy goods and services, when they negotiate or come to an agreed upon price, that's going to dictate what and how much of something is produced. You've probably heard it referred to as a free enterprise system, so it's going to rely on profit motive. People produce things based on what drives profit, what people are willing to pay for it, competition, forces of supply and demand to direct production and distribution is what's really going to answer those economic questions. It's also referred to as capitalism, is another word to describe the market system. Under capitalism, individual investors or capitalists privately own the means of production. So people own farmlands, factories, businesses, not the government. and workers provide labor in exchange for wages or a salary. Advantages: economic activity and growth happens fast. Typically, competition results in high quality goods and services, which also then results in a higher standard of living. The disadvantages: there's typically more instability. In a market economy or a capitalist system like we have here, we've got periods of economic growth that alternate with periods of an economic recession. During growth, times are great, people are buying, people are spending money, there's lots of jobs. In times of a recession, people are not spending money, times are tough, people might be losing their jobs. We also see an unequal distribution of wealth in a market system, which is another disadvantage. So the market divides wealth amongst people according to how society values what they do. So as you know here, a CEO of a successful company is going to earn more than a regular employee of that same company. Some might see this as unfair, but society in this case values the CEO's contribution more than that of the employee. So that results in an unequal distribution of wealth. And then the third system is a command economy. In a command economy, those economic decisions are made by the government or government planners. So government answers those three basic questions. The means of production are publicly owned, which means they're controlled by the government. Government decides what they're making, how much they're making, how much they're going to charge for it, how it's going to be distributed amongst the public. Typically what we see is command economies based on socialist or communist political theories. These theories came up during the mid-1800s to address inequalities of capitalism because of that unequal distribution of wealth that we just talked about as a disadvantage of capitalism. Communist or socialist systems often demanded public ownership of farms and factories in an effort to equally distribute the wealth. In theory, a command economy has distinct advantages over a market economy. So government can ensure full employment by devising enough projects to absorb all members of the workforce, so everybody gets a job. That also sets control on prices, which brings stability to the economy. Command economies can also distribute income more equally, I should say, than a market economy because everyone is sharing in the nation's wealth. However, in practice, the performance of command economies has often been disappointing, and we see a lot of government control over wages and prices. That gives workers little incentive to work harder or produce higher quality goods. So the disadvantage is we typically see goods that are inferior to those that are produced in a market economy. And we also see that those government planners or that government system, no matter how well intentioned, typically is less efficient at making those economic decisions than the market. So we see lower standards of living. We typically see lower quality goods and services, and this can be a great disadvantage. So in reality, in today's society, there really are no pure forms of traditional market or command economies. They just don't exist. They're too simplistic. They're too theoretical. Today, we typically see most common what we refer to as a mixed economy. A mixed economy is going to blend that reliance on the market forces, so people or individuals deciding how much of something they want and how much they're willing to pay for it, with some government involvement. So in the US, although we have historically had a free market economy, we do have the government playing a vital role in economic affairs today. They protect private property rights. They regulate the marketplace to make sure there's no unfair business practices. They often have, we also have, programs in place that redistribute wealth to those in need. Social welfare policies, we'll talk about more of that when we get to our econ class, whichever you take, whether it's Pod B or AP Micro or Macro. We'll talk about mixed economies more in detail. But that is the most common economic system in the world today, is a mixed economy. So there's going to be consumer preferences and government involvement answering those key economic questions. So remember, all economic systems have to answer those three basic questions. What should be produced? How should it be produced? And how should it be distributed to the public? Governments today use traditional market, command, and mixed economies to answer these questions. Thanks for listening, and we'll talk to you next time.